I would like to welcome you to this weekly devotional from the Dora Church of Christ. As we continue to look at this death, burial, and resurrection of the Christ, we began to try to get a hold of the things that are there. It's understanding. Sometimes it's difficult for us to get a hold of what was happening, why it was happening. Why would Christ die on the cross? We know that it was to seek to do his Father's will. But in 1 John, the third chapter, we're so told something. In verse 16, it says, "By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for other brothers." You ever thought about this example that he left us in this death, in this time of giving himself over? He loved us. First John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son." But here it says that this one called Jesus loved us. He loved us. Knowing that we were part of those who hollered, "Crucify him," knowing that we would put the nails in his hands, knowing that we would continue to sin, knowing that we would be weak like man. He was willing to give himself on that cross. In Matthew, the 27th chapter, beginning in 45, it says, "Now from the 6th hour, there was a darkness over the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see if Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him kept watching over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." We find that Christ died such a cruel death. We know that he was willing, he gave himself. But this idea that he loved his Father, and knowing that his Father loved man, he was willing to give himself because he loved man. And that example says that we must follow. We must follow in God's words, in God's wants, in God's seeking us to do his will, to love one another. Our example is in Christ, that willingness to give himself, so that we might have that salvation, so that we might have an eternity with God. It's hard for us to get a hold of these things. We look and we see, we know the things that we do that are wrong. We know the times that we go against God's will. We know the situations we put ourselves into. Are we willing to love like Jesus loved? Are we willing to give ourselves to him? That's what he asks us to do. Are we willing to let this one called the Christ live within us? Are we willing to show that love? Are we willing to accept the cost and live in suffering for Christ? This idea of giving oneself up and saying these things that are mine physically are not important. It's that life I'm living in Christ. To love Him, to seek Him, to seek to do all that I can for God. It had to be a tremendous effort when He hung upon that cross to be there. Why? Simply put, because He loved you and me. Because He loved you and me. What are we going to do with that example that He gave us? That's the biggest question we have for each one of us as a child of God. What are we going to do with the example that Jesus gave us and His willingness to genuinely love man? As we continue this week, as we continue this year, I hope that you will look at this thought, this idea, that it might encourage you to seek more the things of God and less the things of man, and be willing to love like Jesus loved. Thank you so much for being here, and may God bless.